Hello and welcome to this series on producing non-humanoid UMAs. So this is something I get asked about quite a lot, creating creatures or non-humanoid UMA characters. So we're going to dive in, we're going to use something from the asset store, and we're going to have a look at some of the problems. Essentially, it's not an awful lot different from creating humanoid UMAs. However, the big issues you are going to come across are with Mechanim, and that's because using humanoids, Mechanim does all sorts of things for you. You don't even have to think about bones being different, it just works. When you're using generic characters, so those that don't follow the humanoid bone structure, we have to make sure that everything matches up ourselves. If you don't do that, your animations will not work. We're probably going to do a few examples because there's a few differences between having fixed motion and root motion in what you've got to do, but essentially hopefully you'll get the ideas here of what is important while doing this process. So let's have a look at something from the asset store. I've got the Heroic Fantasy Creatures pack here from Pro Factor, and I'm going to pick this rather wonderful Wyvern model. Let's just bring that fella in here, and there he is. So marvelous model, this one, absolutely love it. We're going to make an UMA Wyvern. Now I'm not necessarily going to make adjustment bones, things like that. You already know how to do that. You may not even want to do it. You might just want to make attachments like helmets or saddles, or even just do some overlays to show damage on his body, things like that. So there are lots of reasons for using UMA rather than having fully customizable characters. So before we do anything else, let's get this model working. And we can see here, if I run, it's got no animation on it, so let's just test an animation out. So let's create an animator controller for it, and we'll call this just temporarily Wiv, and let's find an animation that we want to play. I like this fly stationary, so let's drag that in there, and let's just make sure that we've got loop time ticked so it doesn't just play once. I've already done this, so we should now have an animator controller that will work with our character. And let's add that to our Wyvern. Okay. One other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly set the main camera to be looking in the same direction as my scene view. So if I run now, there we go, we've got our Wyvern and we've got him doing an animation. Fabulous. So we know this works out of the box. Great. So let's get this into Blender and actually convert it into an UMA. So here we are in Blender. Let's start by importing our model. So we're going to import FBX. And here's my model list. As you can see, like a lot of assets on the store, you'll have your base model and all of the animations separated out into different models. This is fine, and it's quite common practice. So we're going to open up our base model. This is going to be what our race is created from. So we'll bring that guy in. You can see there's some unusual bone orientations. That's just down to Blender not understanding where to put the ends of the bones. We're going to leave those alone. Feel free to fiddle with them if you're feeling brave, but I just like to leave as much untouched as possible. That means I know it's going to work. So let's have a look what we've got here. We have, if I just pull this down, we have an armature, so it's been recognized as a bone structure, and we have our Wyvern in here. So there he is, and there's his bones. So just like any other race we want to create, if we have a look at the bone structure, it starts with pelvis. We know we need our global and position bones, so let's quickly go into edit mode in our armature, and let's add our global and position bones. So I'm going to head over to add single bone, and I'm going to hit that twice to create 2 extra bones. Let's call them global and position. And just to deal with Blender's weirdness, we are going to change the global bones details. So let's just have a quick look in here. I'm going to reset everything to 0 for the head and the tail, and put our arbitrary offset into the head of the global bone, and leave the tail at 0, 0, 0. And in the position bone I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to just reset everything and just add that offset into the position bone. Great, so let's stack these up. So I'm going to select the pelvis, shift select the position, into the screen, Control P, and keep offset. Okay, there we go, that's attached. So next I'm going to select the position bone, I'm going to shift select the global bone, and again Control P, keep offset. So we now have our hierarchy like a normal UMA. Wonderful. So that's pretty much good to go. One thing that I do want to point out here and now is we must have another named bone. It's something you normally don't see with an UMA, and that's the root bone. It already exists here, it just isn't called root. So the hierarchy when you've created an UMA goes root, global, position, and then the rest of the skeleton. Now you might be forgiven for thinking, if I was to go here and change this to root, that would do the job because that's the correct hierarchy. However, when this gets converted in Unity, this particular bone disappears and the root takes on the name of the armature itself. So changing the name of this in here has no effect whatsoever. We've actually got to go right up to the top of the hierarchy here and call that one root. So even though I've modified that one, it makes no difference, doesn't matter. This is the one that's important to change the word root. Okay, so I'm going to save that back in my project. I'm not going to bother exporting, I'm just going to save it as a Blender file. And let's have a look here. We've got, let's create a new folder and call this UMA Wyvern or Wyvern, however you want to pronounce it. And in there I'm going to create a folder called raw, and in there I'm going to save my Wyvern Blender file. Okay, so let's head back over into Unity and see what we've got. So here we are back in Unity, and you can see my UMA Wyvern folder, our raw folder, and there's my lovely Wyvern that we've just exported from Blender with its new bone structure. So let's get rid of the Wyvern itself, the original, and let's bring my Wyvern in. Okay, obviously it's missing its material. I tell you what, let's quickly fix that just so I can make it look nice. Let's have a PBR Wyvern. There we are. Lovely. So we now have our Wyvern and it looks exactly the same as the original. Let's pop our Armature on there and hit play, and nothing happens. And this is what you're going to come across when you start trying to convert non-humanoid avatars into UMAs. And the key thing here is we must fix this now before we go anywhere near UMA. You may blame UMA for what's going on here. It's nothing to do with UMA. It's all about using generic characters. So we need to fix our animation to make it work with this new bone structure. Okay, now in here at the moment you can see what's carried across. We have our root, our global, and our position. So there is our hierarchy that's absolutely essential. Okay, the reason we must have this root is that UMA itself always calls that bone root. Regardless of what you named it, it will always call it root when it generates. So To fix this, unfortunately, it means we're going to have to modify our animation files as well. And there's a lot of them, so it's a bit of a laborious process, but I want to prove to you that it does work and it is worth doing if you want umified creatures. Okay, so again, the process really simple. We've got to do the same thing that we did here to our animation files. So let's take a look at that. Which one did we use? Let's have a look at our animations. Let's take this fly stationary and let's make that into a umified animation. Okay, so we just need to add our global and position bones to it. So let's skip back over into Blender. I'm just going to create a new file and I'm going to import my animation file. So I'm going to have this, there it is, fly stationary. Import that. Again, there's a wild collection of bones here. If I scrub across, you can see there's the flying animation. I'm not going to worry about how this is all arranged and the orientation of the bones. We're going to do exactly the same as we did in the last one. So let's open up the bone structure. You can see the pelvis. So let's edit that. Let's add 2 bones. Lovely. Rename them to global and position. You should know this drill by now. Let's put our arbitrary offset into the global one, 0 everything else out. Lovely. Let's do the same with the position one, so 0 the head out. Make sure you get all of these. Again, put that opposite offset in there, just so these bones don't destroy themselves. And again, parent these up. So click the pelvis, shift click position, control P, keep offset. And same again, select the position, shift select global, and keep offset. And there we go, we've got our bone structure recreated here. It's not done any damage. Oh dear, it looks like it's not working. Don't worry, that's just because we're in edit mode. Head back into object mode. No damage to the animation at all. Looks great. So if we file and save as, and again this one we'll call Wyvern, and again we'll use that naming convention, fly stationary. That looks good. Let's save that in our raw files and skip back over to Unity. So here we are back in Unity, and as you can see we've now got our Wyvern fly stationary, our newly converted one with our new bone structure. Oh, something I forgot to do there. Let's quickly head back. What did I forget? 10 points if you get it. That's right, I forgot to change my root bone to be called root. Okay, so I'm going to Control S and save that again, head back over into Unity and let that re-import. Okay, so let's have a look. There we go, good, we've got the right structure now. So we should have our animation with the same structure as our actual Wyvern. Let's have a look in here, and you can see root, global, position, and down at the pelvis. Good. So as long as they match up, in theory, in theory they should work. Okay, so I'm going to create a new animation controller here. So create animation controller, and we'll call this Wyvern controller. Why not? And let's open this up, and let's add our take 1 into here. If you're not sure what's going on, let's have a little look. If you look at fly stationary, it's the entire clip, so you might want to tidy this up and rename it. I actually want just that one from 0 to 30. There we go, and I just want to make sure that's looping as well. Good stuff. So after a quick re-import, we should be ready to go. So let's set this up. So if we replace our animation controller with our new animation controller and hit play, because the hierarchies are the same, the animation now works. Okay, so a little bit of a pain there. We need to go through all of our animations, add that global and position bone, and make sure we change that initial bone to be root. Once you've done that, you can test your animations before we go anywhere near Uma. If that all works, the hierarchy is correct, this is going to be a breeze from now on in. So let's do the last step, bring this home and turn this guy into an Uma. So from here on in, it should be pretty much plain sailing. It's what we've done before with our humanoids. Couple of little things we've got to watch out for, but let's go through the process. So first thing, I want to get rid of my this test animation controller, just because it might confuse things. Let's move this one into our folder just to keep everything contained. Okay. What else do we need? Right, so we need to start building the race objects. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to get my T-pose. Now, when we used this extract T-pose before for creating humanoid, we went into my character's rig and we went into the humanoid pose editor. Now, because we're generic, we can't do that. So we'll keep it nice and simple. We'll select the wyvern in the scene and we'll extract the T-pose from that. So if I just hit extract T-pose, again, that should have in my Uma folder, that should have generated my here we are, content generated, there we are, the wyvern T-pose. Let's just pull that into my folder as well. Okay, and we've finished with our base model now, so let's just delete that and let's set our scene up to work with Uma. So I'm going to open up the Uma folder, and in getting started, let's bring in a DCS and let's bring in an actual character, and there he is sat on his own. Let's set this up a little bit, so we'll spin him round so he's facing the camera. We are going to make a couple of changes here because the bones are going to change to a different, completely different bone structure. I'm just going to make sure I've got rebuild skeleton ticked in this race change options, and let's have a look. Additional recipes, I don't want this capsule collider or it'll just fall, so let's remove that. And the animation controllers, yes, I don't want locomotion because that's for humanoid. Let's put our wyvern controller in there, so that will be our default controller. So at the moment we've got a male. If we run that, it'll generate him, but that controller won't work, so there'll be absolute nonsense, nothing happens. So let's not worry about that. That will be fixed because that controller will work nicely with our wyvern. Okay, so let's start creating the assets we need. Let's open up the slot builder and let's start filling out our info. So just collapse this. Let's put our wyvern mesh in here, the Uma material. Let's have a look at what textures we've got. Yes, we've got albedo, we've got normal, and we've got specular. So let's go for a specular material. Uma diffuse normal specular. We've got ambient occlusion as well. Should we do that? Yeah, let's make him look fancy. So diffuse normal specular occlusion, that's what we'll go for. Great. Close that down. Destination folder, let's go into our Uma wyvern. The root bone we've made global, so that's great. Element name, let's call this wyvern base. Good. Let's create an overlay and add that to the global library while we're on. Now I will get a warning here about the slot's size being very large. This is because there was scaling on the original model in the bones. You can try and sort that out, how I meticulously went through with the humanoid one. However, when you start messing around with bone scaling when there is animation to be dealt with, it causes a bit of a nightmare. So I left them alone. It causes this error to pop up in here. Don't panic about it. It will all sort itself out. It'll all balance out in the end, trust me. So I'm going to create my slot, and everything has worked correctly. Brilliant. So let's have a look at what we've got in here now. So here we are, Wyvern base, and we've now got our slot and our overlay. Let's set this overlay up. So there's our 4 textures. Let's bring them in. So my albedo can come in, my bump map, my gloss, and finally that ambient occlusion can come in as well. So brilliant, we've got an overlay that's going to work. We're good to go. We've got a T-pose ready, so we can start creating our race files in here. So our 2 race files. So into our Wyvern folder and create a core text recipe, and this can be our base recipe. So let's call this Wyvern base recipe. Good. And let's also create our race data, and again we'll call this Wyvern race data. Okay. So in our race data, this is the bit where we're going to do a bit of fiddling really. First of all, let's give him a name. So this will be Wyvern. The target doesn't want to be humanoid. We need to change that to generic, so that's a bit of a difference. We need to put in a base recipe, so let's pop that in, and you'll notice when I change the base recipe it deletes all of my good work up here, so watch out for that. So I'm gonna we need to put that base recipe in first. So let's retype this Wyvern generic, and let's add our T-pose to it. Okay, that should be everything I need for that. All of these different slots that are in there, we can leave them there. I'm actually going to delete them because they're not going to make much sense unless you're going to fully dress your Wyvern. But I might have headgear or saddle or horns or whatever modifications I want. Again, look at that. When did that happen? Look at that. Let's try that again. Wyvern, enter, generic, T-pose. Very bizarre. You stay there, you guys. Let's just flick away to something else, the base recipe, and then back. Yeah. So keep your eye on those. I don't know why they disappeared, but tricky little things. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add both my race data to the library, and we should see this increment. It's on 8 at the moment. It's gone up to 9, and I'm going to add my base recipe. So we should see these text recipes. It's on 95. Let's see that. 96. Great. So they're both added to the global library. So the race data is pretty much done. Let's have a look at the recipe and our slots. So it doesn't have any race data. Let's pick our Wyvern race data, and let's put our slot and overlay in there. So that's the Wyvern base slot and the Wyvern base overlay, and that's it. So just like before, we should have created a full race here. This should just work. Now let's quickly, before we run, have a look in here. Race animation controllers. I just want to show you, let's remove that Wyvern controller. If I run, in fact let's not run, let's switch over to the Wyvern race and run. You should see that your Wyvern is absolutely huge. let's just zoom out. It's about 100 times too big. This is the error that the slot builder was giving us. Okay, so the base model, just a base UMA, will be absolutely massive. This will all balance out when we add our animations, because they have that scaling correction built into them. Yeah, because we haven't changed anything when we were in Blender. So if I add my Wyvern controller and run now, there we go, he is the correct size. We're not zoomed out, so the actual animator controller is correcting that scaling issue that we had. And basically we've now got an animated generic UMA Wyvern. I've obviously not added any DNA, I've not created any slots, but you know how to do that already. From here on in, it's pretty straightforward. What I will say is, what I have shown you is for animations that do not contain root motion. So what we'll have a look at in the next example is fiddling about with a generic model that has root motion and making sure that we can retain that root movement even though we're adding extra bones to our UMA. Okay, so have fun with that, I'm sure you will, and I'll see you next time. And once again, I'd like to say a big thank you to my patrons for making this possible. If you would like to support me, feel free to click that link at the end of the video. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.